Hey, thanks for stopping by Imagine Communications today. I'm John Mailhot. I'm here with Cassidy Phillips, and we're here to talk about what's going on in the live production world. Our focus of late has been around live production, particularly integrating UHD and HDR elements and building new facilities to make fantastic sports video. Now, it's not as though we started yesterday. We've been involved in this for quite a few years. We've done a number of different projects around the world that incorporate IP technology, HDR, UHD, and so forth. Cassidy, can you remind me about a few of those?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been an interesting mix of things using 2110, 2022-6 for uncompressed IP workflows, as well as SDI systems that maybe just have a little IP or big IP systems with a little SDI. We've done distributed campuses where they have maybe an SDI core and they're using IP to optimize the links between multiple venues to make it all feel like one big router under our Magellan SDNO. But we've also done professional arenas and professional stadiums where from one night it could be a concert to the next night there's a sporting event, and they're changing completely how they're producing the show on a COTS-based infrastructure. Or maybe they're even mixing in compressed workflows and legacy SDI workflows all under one control panel. And it doesn't really matter under our control system, Magellan SDNO, whether they have SDI, uncompressed IP, or compressed IP, all in the same ecosystem. We can make it feel like one big router, right, John?
Right, and that's really the whole goal, is that operators come in, particularly in sporting events. A lot of them are freelancers. They turn up. When they sit down to do their job, they don't need to really care that this is an IP system or this was implemented in some interesting way. They just want to sit down a panel, hit take, and go and do their job. And so the whole key in these things is to preserve the feel of traditional television routing infrastructure and make it operations friendly, make it something that people can make their show instead of worrying about technology.
Right. And that's important not only when you have operators who could be working in one arena and a different stadium the next day, but it's also important when you have things like trucks where they do a completely different type of event from one day to the next. So you want that operational feel to be as expected while maybe changing sort of the identity of what that hardware is doing from one event to the next.
Right. And it's not just, simple stuff, right? I mean, we have truck customers who this event is in UHD with HDR and HLG. The next day's event isn't. The next day's event is 1080p or even 1080i. And so there's a lot of reconfiguration that happens, but it also frees up resources. So where you might need a bunch of UHD conversion units one day, the next day you might have a lot more cameras, you need more multi-viewers. That's why we built the Selenio Network Processor as a network attached processor. So you have this cloth, and on this show you can knit a shirt out of it. On this show you can knit something else out of it. And each show by show, you can reconfigure to do the thing that show needs. You're not carrying extra weight on the truck. You're not carrying extra network hardware. Really what you're doing is carrying software licenses that can do different things for different events.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And with our control system, you can make it all feel like one big router, regardless of what the mix of different sources and destinations is in terms of SDI or IP and compressed IP. But with the Selenio Network Processor, you're able to conform those different media types to whatever you need in terms of those UHD and HD formats and HDR color imageries.
Oh, yeah. I mean, HDR looks great. UHD looks great. UHD with HDR looks great. But I'll tell you, there's 8 different ways to carry UHD in a facility, and no two pieces of equipment seem to speak the same one sometimes. So it's a great time to be in the conversion business, but it's also a challenge. That's a big part of our product lineup with SMP, is really being the glue that can take the signal you got from the venue, say, and turn it into what you need on the truck, or take the signal you have on the truck and turn it into what the truck next to you needs. Because
Right.
every event, there's a certain amount of last-minute conversion of turning what you need into what you have.
So we've had these Selenio Network processors in the field working for live events, high-profile live sporting events for over 2 years now, right? But for people who are early adopters of the SNP, we're aggressively adding new features to that platform all the time. So there are people who had SNPs racked and cabled 2 years ago who were able to do things like add the new multi-viewer personality.
Yep, the multi-viewer has been real popular because it supports HDR. So people can actually choose to have operators staring at HDR all day or have operators getting an SDR version that integrates the HDR. And there's different right things to do depending on what position in the operation things are. So, as a company, we've made our trade on processors and signal converters forever. And it used to be that you made a frame with a bunch of little tiny cards, and each card did a different thing, and you had a giant basket full of cards. Well, that's just not how the world works anymore. So instead, what we do now is we make these very flexible appliance products that then you software key into whatever you need for that show. And that's true whether you're in a truck or whether you're in a remote or whether you're in a venue. So this has rippled into the product, right? So a lot of our focus has been on more and more different personalities to go into this flexible fabric.
Tell us a little more about how that Selenio Network Processor multi-viewer is optimized for live production.
Oh, well, that's the whole trick, right? Is that live production is a human-oriented thing where the operations team is part of the production. So it's a very low latency multi-viewer. But more importantly, it also manages HDR in the multi-viewer. So you can combine HDR and SDR signals into one canvas, and that canvas can be HDR or SDR. So different operating positions can see the thing they need to see and do their job tailored to what their really workflow is for that event.
One of the other really interesting things about these IP and hybrid systems is the amount of distance, physical distance, that we can now cover with one routing system and have it feel like a cohesive router. So in the case of those distributed campuses, we might have venues separated by 10 kilometers that are all tying back to one core where a single operator can control the routing between sources and destinations at each of those venues using optimized fiber with packet technology. Even if the core of the router is SDI, you can still leverage that IP technology to optimize your system and have a low latency performance.
Yeah, no, we've built lots of systems around the world where the router is SDI, but we're using IP technology, or at least the optics and things from IP technology, to link buildings and link campuses, because on the SNP, you get the path redundancy, you get the timing transfer through PTP, so the far end gets a copy of your sync, and you get the path diversity, the 2022-7 path diversity, so you don't have to be terrified that a fiber could break. And in a campus environment, it might take you a while to get that fiber fixed. You don't have a fleet of trucks. So having that redundancy gives you an operational assurance level that you just don't get with single paths. A big focus in the industry lately has been all about how do you get signals over really long distances, like maybe even from the ground to that puffy thing in the sky. And so JPEG XS is clearly the focus of all that activity, both in the ground-to-ground communication between facilities over networks that you have to pay for, as well as getting into more scalable cloud-type networks.
And then one of the complexities that we've always run into from the control side is, again, for mixing all these different signals and sources and destinations and different physical devices, I may also be asked to mix an audio system with a video system, perhaps an existing audio system. What are we doing to improve the interaction between a 2110 video system and an audio system?
Well, a couple things going on there. The NMOS has become real, and it's become real in the audio industry as well. So if you buy audio gear from Calrec or any of the usual suspects, you'll find that equipment has 2110 capability and NMOS controls on it. So that's something that just wasn't the case a year and a half ago, that now it's an orderable item. You say, look, got to have NMOS, and people do. So all the NMOS integration on SDNO has gone really well. We have a lot of facilities now stood up using NMOS as the common protocol to talk to things. Now, with audio, there's the second challenge of no two devices seem to have the same idea of how to organize the audio. So there's people who put a stereo pair in every stream. There's putting 8 channels in every stream. There's some extreme people that put one mono channel in each stream and make full breakaway. On SNP, we opted to support all those things. But from a control perspective, we have to integrate with all the other stuff. So SDNO has a nice set of features for managing the audio channels and how they interact. And we're adding more and more capability on how SDNO can manage to deal with the way that different devices want the audio in a network where maybe not every stream is exactly what they want.
What if I want to combine multiple routing systems, John, where I want to have SDNO sort of have visibility on two different routing systems and understand the relationship between them?
That's just table stakes in the routing world. That's not a new problem for IP. Every time we sell an SDI router into a facility, there's the challenge that there's a Grass router or an Evertz router or a Utah router or whatever next to it. And we have to generate controls to it, get statuses from it, organize tie lines between them. So that protocol translation has been in our playbook for the history of the company. And there aren't thankfully too many new top-level routing protocols. People tend to keep them for a long time. So we've got translations for almost every router that you would want to own.
So speaking of the ability of people to see what's happening in their system and understand and operate the system as they expect, we've gone to great lengths to make sure that Magellan SDNO makes that routing system feel the way that people expect a router to feel, with that same destination source take behavior that they've become familiar with for years. So an operator could work one event at one venue and then go down the street and work at one of our venues and not have to learn everything about SMPTE 2110, for example. But one of the other cool tools that we have is PathView, right, John?
Oh yeah, PathView is really important because in the old days, you built a facility, you got a bunch of as-built drawings, they hung in a binder on the wall, and if you needed to figure out what was going where, you just pull up those drawings, you trace the wire, and you got a patch panel, and you're all set. Well, IP isn't that way, right? Everything's connected to the switches. PathView is effectively a virtual wiring diagram that shows you a live view of what's connected to what and what's feeding what in a signal plane right now. And it does things you could never do on paper because it shows you the breakaways of the audio, it shows you what's going to where, it shows you virtual reentries and how those affect the workflow, all the stuff you need to trace out what's happening. And it makes these live diagrams that are then operationally useful. You could put that up in a corner on your multi-viewer or on your desk, and as you switch the show, you see all the lines change, and it shows what's really happening.
So going back to the SMP, we do this UHD, we do HDR, we have a low latency multi-viewer. What about 8K, John?
8K, just when you thought UHD was easy, or at least doable, 8K is not a joke. There are a couple of broadcasters internationally that are spending time and money and figuring out how are they going to do 8K. First, it'll be a couple of high-profile events and test shoots, and, building interest. But the same, economic factors and market drivers that drove the UHD transition are aligned behind 8K. Now, the time frame of 8K and that could be a little more uncertain, but I think that 8K will have its place and its time, and that we've actually added some 8K stuff into SNP and the ability to do certain 8K things because there are people trying to build out workflows in it.
So it's not so much a limitation of the infrastructure or the hardware as it is just making decisions about how to program these things.
Yeah, in the long term, I'd say 8K is still early days, and there's still a lot of trade-offs. Nobody's going to just spring forth. There's not a mountain of different 8K cameras to choose from, or 8K displays are still pretty rare. But the ecosystem is starting to come together for 8K.
So thank you for coming by the Imagine virtual booth, and we look forward to speaking with you about whatever your workflow needs might be and talking about system design with you.
Have a great rest of your day.